Howdy, this is Dr. Stacy Lyle. I'm going to cover in detail Texas land history. The reason that we cover this in detail is that Texas, because it owns its own lands, is very litigious, and I've operated and expert witnessed in a lot of lawsuits having to do with mineral ownerships in the state of Texas, understanding how it works. I'll cover the other states in mineral ownership as we go on later on, BLM through using the Gold Book as we journey on. But I think it's important that we spend some good time here on Texas land history and how land was given out, and then ultimately how the land and minerals were severed. Representing this in a GIS becomes quite complex because of the unusual way that land has been given out versus the public land system in the mile by mile sections. Okay, to begin with, the state of Texas has been owned by Spain, the Six Flags, Spain, Mexico, the France for a short while, the Republic of Texas, the United States, and then the Confederate States have all placed claim to the United States. Land has been given away under the Spanish and Mexican, basically, and the Republic of Texas on into the state of Texas. Any records that we have of the Spanish and Mexican land grants are held in the Spanish collection at the General Land Office. But the Texas Republican state grants were basically given up, between 1836 and 45. So 21, 36, 45. 1821 we were Spain till 36 we were Mexico. 1836 to 1845 we were the Republic of Texas, and then after that the state of Texas. So the lands were given away heavily under the first, second, third, and fourth head right grants, along with preemption grants, military grants, loan and sales scripts, and then internal improvement scripts such as railroad scripts or canal scripts. So during the Mexican time frame, the land that was given away were given away in sitios, or 5,000 bars by 5,000 bars, also known as a league of land. And they determined under the new colonization law, they said that a bar is 33 and a third inches, and that's how everything should be made. There should be 2 calls to bearing trees at each corner and have the grantors' names carved in the trees. Obviously, as we went to the West Texas, we didn't have a lot of trees, so they still have a lot of bears, and you'll see this in our lab when we read an original land grant. Not more than 2,500 varas front a river, all angles are true, and it uses civil law, which means that it must be written down in statute for it to really be a law. Okay, so we keep going, and the Republic time frame, when it got its independence, they were land rich but money poor. So the United States, they wanted to join the United States right away, but they were not allowed because of the debt that they had. So what they did is they ended up selling a lot of their land through these different granting portions before they became a state, and they got to keep their land. When they became a state, they in their debt, and lo and behold, a lot of minerals in that state, so that became very valuable to the state of Texas. Now, the land grants that were given away, we need to keep some key terms. In the Spanish and Mexican, those are called titles. When the land is severed from the sovereign, it is a patent that you receive, and it is these impresarios that brought them in. Again, a league or a sitio, 5,000 bars by 5,000 bars. You also had a labor of 177 acres, or 1,000 bars by 1,000 bars. So the head of land that came in during this time were given up to 1 league. A single man got a quarter of a league. Mexican citizens could purchase up to 11 leagues. When it was the state of or the Republic of Texas, you could get a league and a labor. A league if you were doing ranching, a labor if you were doing farming. You had to do some things there. You had a third of a league in labors that were eligible, and then the numbers started going down to 640, 320, and following, that you could get some additional land if the other 10 acres were cultivated. We also had preemption grants, which allowed individuals to claim up to 320 of unappropriated land. So you'll see a lot of those. Now, the colonization laws of uh, the Republic of Texas, military grants for your service that you might have done for work as both the Republic and then ultimately even in the Confederates you were given 1,280 acres. Then we have a lot of the loan and sales scripts. You'll see the Vine script, Sam Houston, Toby White, a lot of the Bear scripts, lots of different scripts that were selling the land away. The big national road scripts, the railroad scripts being the biggest, and this is where the Railroad Commission, who manages a lot of our oil and gas because of the fact that the railroad commissions were to deal with the railroad scripts in our Panhandle and West Texas area, where those were given away. And then they determined that they needed land to be set aside to help to pay for schools. So they had school lands. Lands were trying to given away in the county where the schools were created. If not, you might find counties out in very West Texas that are owned by counties back to the east. Okay, so basically in the Hogue versus Baker, they ran out of land, or they said there was no more land, but there were small pieces of land that were out there. There were some land scripts and things of that nature. So you can read more about the Spanish and Mexican period and the ways that they put land out for that. I won't go through a lot of that, but there's some good information there. And then looking at the archives and doing work at the General Land Office. So basically, lots of data, a lot of land was given away. If you're trying to do research it there, you need to first step look at the process of understanding, did they get a certificate? Now they would say land, and they would get off a train or a boat, and they would go in and buy a certificate for an amount of land, let's say 640 acres. But the land, they didn't know where that was at. So what they would do with that land is go to a county, go to the county surveyor and say, I have a certificate, I own 640 acres. The county surveyor would then survey that land and generate field notes that describe that land and send that to the General Land Office. The date that the field notes were generated started the clock of ownership. Once you fulfilled the script, which might say you for the next 15 years you need to cultivate it or grow something on it, and then you pay the appropriate fees, then you could apply for a patent, which now means that the land has been severed from the sovereign and is owned by the individual. There's actually lands out there that haven't been patented yet. The certificate date is not the date that establishes the land, nor is the patent date. It's the date that the field notes were recorded at the General Land Office. And that becomes key in understanding junior-senior rights. If you have a bunch of tracts that seem to overlay each other, who is whom? And this becomes a huge portion in a court case that we'll talk about later on, which is the Stafford versus King, where Stafford and King had two pieces of property that overlaid each other, and then who should be the senior. So you do searches for individual names. You might look for abstract numbers or other portions and get copies of the data that's out there. So pretty much throughout the state of Texas, the counties were created and county surveyors were put throughout the counties that could survey and create those field notes that needed to be turned into the General Land Office. Sometimes they would record them locally in the courthouse there, but ultimately you should find them at the General Land Office. It's interesting to know if you're having problems trying to determine where these are at. If you're looking at the General Land Office records, you might need to go to the local county records to look at those. They also, because of the size of Texas, and they couldn't get everything back to Austin to the central location, they created land districts, and the land districts could work to try to organize those records and put those in. So you might need to look at local land districts to see where they're at, and so you can see the different land districts that are out there. So let's look at the shapes that we would find in the state of Texas. First, you would see portions. These are very narrow, long pieces of tracts of land. You'll see examples of that, and you'll see some of that in the General Land Office GIS and in the land records. So again, this is important for us to understand those. How long were those? How were they created? What are the rules for that? A league or sitio, 5,000 bars by $5,000 varas, excuse me, and then a labor, and then you could have a 1,280 acre tract or 640 acre tract. All right, so one thing to keep in mind is a 640 acre tract is a mile by a mile, of course, but the 1900.8 varas, which is basically a mile, is a good way to look at it. When you're going from varas to feet, it's easy to kind of remember. If you take the feet, multiply it by 0.36, you'll get varas. Again, divide 1900.8 by 0.36, you'll get feet. Okay, so we're a meets and bounds states, which means land was just kind of chaotically put throughout everywhere. The Spanish and Mexican would put out a grant and say that they could have that land, and then pretty much when it was surveyed, that created the date of ownership, and that gave them a title. There was no patenting process, and somewhat it was when they got through having it surveyed and recorded those records. Quite important. There was a ship carrying a lot of those records that crashed off the coast of Corpus Christi that has brought about a lot of land arguments of who owns a lot of the South Texas land. But let's talk about the Republic of Texas. So first off, you would get a certificate, and then you would go to that surveyor. They would survey it. They generated field notes. That's the date of ownership. Then you had some proof or some condition. Then you get a patent. The General Land Office field notes interpretation, so they would need to know things like the survey, the class and number. The surveyor would have a number. He would say keep up an order that he would have in that county, the survey date, and then any patented or corrected, fortified, or canceled notes. Maybe they had found something that was done incorrectly. They might have to go back and fix this. I actually had a lawsuit where somebody drilled into another piece of property because they had used older patent notes, not canceled ones that had been corrected. So you really have to watch for that. Field notes should be assembled by the name on the survey in chronological order. You're going to look for the different size of lands that are out there and try to keep a running understanding of those. You have the bounty for service to military. Donations were given for those that passed away in their service to the military. Preemption grants, you had the 320s and then later went to 160s. That was going out and finding any land that there was at. Then you have these railroad sections that are out there, all right? And then you need to look to see if it's square and why it's not square. My highlighting's off there a little bit. Is it fronting a river? Note all the locative calls such as creeks and roads that they cross to help you to try to determine where it's at. Determining the field notes could have been written using field notes of a joiner. Sometimes they would not go out there. They would sit there and sell several set of field notes, then go into the field later on and survey it, and mistakes sometimes would happen. And you might call those office surveys that go on. And then you form your opinion of where that's at. Now when you're building a GIS, you'll look in the videos later on how Tobin went through and used aerial photos to try to account for everything. But still out there today in the state of Texas, there's a lot of land unaccounted for that's out there. Now at the General Land Office, you have something called the patent jacket or the original land certificate field notes and everything inside a little folder here with listings of what took place in that scenario. You might have scrap file descriptions. Okay, what is scrap files? Sometimes we'd leave gaps between pieces of land that weren't quite accounted for, and so people went back and started picking up all these scraps. There was a big scrap hunt that went on in the 70s and 60s as people were trying to get those for the oil and gas. A lot of landowners thought they owned it and it was being bought out from underneath them, so they established some laws that I'll talk about later on called good faith claims that said really who should have access to that. But if you were told you're going to get 640 acres, but you go out and you survey and you really find you have 680 acres, you might have extra acreage. Who owns that? Well, the state really does. And you have to clear up that title to try to do that. So you have these county maps, or what's called abstract maps, that try to put together all the pieces that you see of the land, piecing them all together. You'll hear them as sketch files, rolled sketch files, county maps, showing where all the land is together. Now the General Land Office field notes, they created a form, and typically what we see here is the drawing or the sketch, or what we would think of as a survey plat. But the field notes are not what's written in the field, it's really what's written down here that describe the property in detail. Just looking at this piece of property, if you will, here, this is for 1024. It's made for acres of land for this individual. Notice that they have the variations between true north and magnetic north at this time. So any bearings that you see here, all right, should be true north bearings, not magnetic bearings. And they use this, they say variation, but it's really declination at that time from that location. So they would say, when was this survey done? It says, okay, the 6th of September, okay, in 1901. So that really is the date that this was, field notes were put together. But if we look back, we can see here that it was surveyed on this date. And this date of December 12th, 1899 is the true date, although they wrote the field notes over here September, almost 2 years later. The reason that this becomes important is that's when monuments or things were placed on the ground to alert the public that this person owns the land. So that is the key date for us, and that is an information that might be entered as an attribute that we need in our land database system. Okay, so now we go through and we describe it. We start at the northwest corner of the Nelson Murray survey, and so what it's doing right there is calling for an adjoiner. Now that joiner is an artificial call, and later on we'll go through the dignity of calls as we look at what becomes first. And they said, well, there is a mesquite that bears south 42.5 west 15 bars, and a pecan north 71 west 15 bars in the northeast corner of said tract, all right, identified by the bearings which are present and perfect. Bears north 71 east 1900 bars, so they go north 7100 for 1900 bars, so that 1900 again is probably about a mile. Thence 71 320 bars to a stone mound in the west line of the Harrell survey for the southeast corner. Our old stone mound, the original corner of the Harrell south, bears south 19 east for 7 bars. Thence north 19 bars for 19 degrees west for 45 bars to the southeast corner, all right, of some other survey. A stone mound is there, and then north 3, looks like 13.5 east for 35 bars, and then north 14 bars, a something oak, and then something bars here. Thence 320 bars to the section into the said survey to the point of beginning. Okay, so that all being said in there, then we have how many acres are being surveyed here. Okay, so it looks like they're 2 and 55 and 100 acres. The area is the least important. These descriptions become what sets it, if it actually is that acreage, if you find the monuments that are in place, they hold over the acreage. In a lot of cases, they would give you a little extra land because there was a lot of extra land there. So they would call for this acreage, but you go and you might have excess acreage in there. This becomes a bit of a problem. We're building topology. Who gets this excess acreage, and who owns that? So this is something in land database systems that we have to take into consideration of how we assign that or represent that. All right, and we'll talk about that later on in the semester. So, just going back through there, we have the Spanish and Mexican land grants. We have all these sales and giveaway land grants, mineral awards, minerals and surfaces. They have information of that, royalties. The state of Texas, when they sold out the land, they did pass the minerals to the landowners. The landowners could sever the minerals and keep portions themselves, but there were times when the state did keep their own minerals. All right, and then patents, deed of acquittance. This is if you find you have a whole bunch of acreage, you have to go through and get what's called a deed of acquittance and have the state quit their claim to that. That might not be where it's done free necessarily. That might be where they own a stake in the actual minerals that are there. So if you have a lot of excess acreage, there's something you have to deal with in your division of order in understanding that. All right, so there are a lot of other data sets and things that can help you. Again, scrap files were these small vacant pieces of property that were not severed from the sovereign. A lot of those are described where individuals went back and tried to get those portions. The General Land Office has an online map record information. You can go to their GIS. I have a link to that, and I use that. There's a lot of different abstract maps. Tobin is one of the ones. We go through that with the video. That is now what's called P2. You can purchase that land data sets, and it has not just the building of the abstract maps or the sketches altogether, but it has also other pertinent information, calls to adjoiners and calls to others. So looking at the property, you had a league, a third of a league, a quarter of a league, 640, 320. There should have been a 1280 in here, and then a labor, and just give you a small size of a football field, just to give you an idea. The different sizes that you have here. Here you can see a sketch file, and it's got the name of the person who received the land grant. These are Spanish land grants, and then they have some abstract numbers that they assign, maybe some other numbers, and then they show it's been patented. All right, from that standpoint. They have those other files that you'll see here that has the description. They also, in some of their sketch files, will have some unique information. Not only would they have the abstract, maybe the survey or the survey number, but you'll see other information provided with some symbols. And some of these symbols that you might see is where 2 calls for 3, 10, and 11 as its corner, right? And then 11 calls for 12, so these different symbols are very important. You'll see these symbols carried over to Tobin maps, and so here I have an outline of what these different symbols mean if you're looking at Tobin sketch maps, and later on we'll look at some of those as we go on. Another unique thing that you'll notice about the state of Texas is because under the Spanish grant, they owned 3 marine leagues, or about 9 miles to sea. If you look at Texas and Florida, which are both Spanish, how much they owned to the sea is more than the English states, who did not have 3 marine leagues. So the United States has a different littoral boundary and a boundary out to sea, and so they have a lot more land out to sea for the position. Okay, so that was a quick summary of Texas land ownership.